The media has fallen down and not continued to play that watchdog responsibility that they have to the American people.
There's no corporate influence. There's nobody standing over or sponsors saying, oh, gee, we don't like that story. Don't cover that story.
Yeah, I've had a very different experience in my time of producing and writing, that I have felt that influence.
It seems to me all of us had our own personal opinions, and to me I think what's really important is just that we would not convey our personal opinions or let it sway our reporting or how we were covering the news.
Is there a liberal bias in the media? How do corporate ownership and advertisers influence news coverage? Is there a larger cover-up or conspiracy at work? Today we're asking a panel of experts, Lew Rothbart from KNBC, TV producer Jacquie Jordan, political blogger and investigative reporter Brad Friedman, and former TV anchor Patty Malone. First up, Lew Rothbart and Brad Friedman. Lew is an assignment editor and news writer at KNBC and teaches at the USC Annenberg School for Communication. Pleasure to have you here today, Lew. Lew, is there a liberal bias in the media?
Well, it all depends on what you want to define as the media. If you're talking about the big three networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, I've worked for two of them, and I didn't see any great evidence of it. If you want to talk about Fox, now we're getting into a whole different realm.
From the other side,
they come at it with a a very clear point of view, a very clear conservative point of view, and I think they make no bones about it. I feel unfortunate. I feel sorry for the people who think that they're getting, to use the Fox term, fair and balanced. I feel sorry for the people who look at that and accept it for what it is, because it's hardly that. But I think that any bias that you might see on any of the other major networks, the NBC, the CBS, there is, I think, I don't want to say a liberal slant. I think it's less deliberate. I think there are some times where it may sneak in there, but I don't think it's anything.
It's unconscious or somehow in the.
Yeah, I think in the way that they might they'll say Ted Kennedy, and then they'll say conservative Senator Strom Thurmond, and they'll tend to label people where they don't tend to label the liberals as much as they do the conservatives.
So you're admitting it probably sneaks in some way, shape, or form.
I think not deliberate.
Not deliberate.
I think not deliberate, and in fact, if anything, there's a very overt effort not to slant the news in any way. I mean, these things tend to come back, and before the pieces are aired, look at them to make sure that they're objective, to make sure that there's fairness to both sides, that both sides are given equal time to present their arguments. And what I have seen really is much more of an effort to be fair to both sides. I don't see a lot of bias.
All right, Brad Friedman from Brad Blog. Is there a liberal bias in the news media?
No, not only is there not a liberal bias, I would argue that there is the other bias. I'm not going to call it a conservative bias. I'll call it a right-wing bias.
Right-wing bias.
And in fact, yeah, because remember, all of these, we have a handful of media corporations that now control the entirety of the media, the broadcast mainstream media, and they're all corporately owned. And if anything, I believe there's a corporate bias.
Corporate bias.
Right, which tends to be conservative, Republican, right-wing. Now, the right-wingers will give you information on the other side, and they'll point to a couple of points. They'll point to, one, a study that showed that reporters tend to be Democrats. And the suggestion there is that a Democrat could not possibly report even-handedly because they're a Democrat. Problem is, it's not the reporters who tend to decide the stories. It's the editors and the owners of the company who tend to decide what will be covered and what won't. The other thing they'll quote is there's a few studies, for example, one out of University of Missouri, Jeff Milo, a right-winger who was paid to do this study, and basically they'll go through incidents in the media, for example, before the 2004 election, and any time the Iraq War was mentioned, they would tick that off as a Democratic issue. Now, obviously, the Iraq War was in the news quite a bit before the 2004 election, and it wasn't going well. But reporting on that does not make the media biased towards the Democrats. So I see quite the other side, and even as Lew suggested, that this effort to try to be quote-unquote fair and balanced in these cases, it's generally a bunch of folks who are going out of their way to appease the right-wingers who have been for years claiming this liberal media bias that I see absolutely no evidence of, and I see quite the opposite. I don't see those same reporters going out of their way to make sure that the liberal or the Democratic or even the progressive side of these issues are covered.
Well, what about Fox News? What do you think of their coverage?
Oh, Fox News is a joke. It's the Republican news channel. I mean, everybody knows that. Anybody who, well, not everybody knows that. Apparently, a lot of their watchers don't, their viewers don't. But yeah, I mean, it's a propaganda outlet, period. But remember, on top of the news, you've got to add the Sean Hannitys, the Rush Limbaughs, the Michael Savages, the Laura Ingrams, the William Bennett, on and on and on, 24 hours a day across the radio spectrum, not just the TV spectrum, but across the radio spectrum as well. They are everywhere. Those are our public airwaves. And they're using them for right-wing propaganda from top to bottom. You can drive to any city in the nation and probably turn on the radio and hear conservative, quote-unquote conservative talk radio 2 and 3 levels deep. Good luck finding progressive talk or anything that counters this right-wing spin.
But then that raises the question of actually how much influence do they have? If you have a Bill Clinton who was elected twice, and now you have a Barack Obama who was elected, then you say, well, gee, maybe they don't have that major influence that they sometimes, or that people think that they do.
I think they do, because it's not just about the presidential race, it's about the policy. It's what, look, just because Americans overcome this idiocy doesn't mean that we don't have it.
So where does this come from, though? Why do we have you've all heard of the perception there's this liberal bias in the media. If it's really more, he says it creeps in maybe unintentionally, you say no, it's really more corporate bias or Republican bias. Why does everybody think there's a liberal bias?
Well, because the right wing has spent many years trying to put that perception out there, and even going so far as to invent this fair and balanced idea on Fox News. You know, fairness is one thing. Balance is often nonsense and little more than a way to level an unlevel playing field for the bad guys. It's like saying, you know, I saw someone give the example once that you can go to you can say that it's raining outside, or you can say that it's sunny outside, and to give both points of view when anyone can walk to the window and see clearly that it is raining outside, it shows that one side is lying, and yet we've come down to this, there's two sides to every issue.
Well, Lew, since you're actually sitting there writing the news, he says people are telling you what stories to write.
I was going to mention that. I was waiting for a pause there.
Do you get a call from headquarters from GE telling you what you can write on the news at night?
That's what I was going to mention. I've been doing this for a long time, and I have to say we have never gotten any call down or any corporate level or influence saying this is the approach we're going to take on this story, or this is the point of view. That's never come down, actually, and it's always been, we look at the stories, we look at what we want to cover, we look at what we feel are the issues of the day, but there has never been anything that has come down from on high saying, here's your walking orders for the day. These are the stories we want to look at.
Could I challenge that thought
Sure.
for a second? Now, I realize they might not do that, and I've dealt with a lot of reporters at a lot of network operations where they want to cover a story, and the folks above them, the attorneys, say no, we can't for this, that reason, or the other. But you do have orders, so to speak, even if it's to keep the ratings up. And if covering a car chase is going to bring in more ratings, and I'm not saying you personally are doing this, but a lot of the networks and certainly the local channels, if it bleeds, it leads. They will go with that rather than what is necessarily important to the citizens.
Well, and that would be a question of sensationalism, I think. But that's still different, though, than, say, the chairman of GE calling him up and say, look, here are your stories for the news tonight.
Mm-hmm. Well, somebody hired him, though.
But, in any way, the other side of this is we also go bend over backwards the other way. When there is a story about GE, when there is a story about Universal, we will do the story. We never shy away from the story, but we also make it very clear that NBC is owned by GE or
so
owned
even
by
if it's
Universal.
Unfavorable, if something comes out about the chairman tomorrow,
or if someone feels that, gee, we have an axe to grind, we're making it very clear that, here's our ownership. So if you think there's something going on here, we want to make sure that you understand that we're owned by this large corporate entity.
What about advertisers? Let's say the car companies are a major advertiser. Are you going to go after your biggest, your cash cow?
That's why they have the advertising salespeople down at one end of the building and the news department down at the other end of the building. And there's this large invisible wall that takes place there. And again, we've had no influence from advertisers. The only thing that ever happens, and this has been just a tradition, going back years and years and years, in the event of a plane crash, they dump all the advertising for that particular airline. In some cases, all the airlines. But there's no watching over any sponsors.
Brad, we're almost out of time, but comment on that? Do advertisers influence the coverage?
Excuse me. Yeah, well, the key there being that it's an invisible wall, and therefore it can be difficult. And I hope that, because I know it's difficult even on my own blog. When I get advertisements, I have to think, well, now do I want to go out?
You're influenced by the advertisers.
Well, yeah. Do you want to now go out and beat the crap out of them? So, and a lot of these stations make money from political advertisements around election years and so forth. So it's very difficult. So I think we all have to work hard to make sure that invisible wall stays up. But there is a creeping influence, and we have to be careful about it. And if you look at the difference between the coverage from 2000 to 2008 versus in the years prior, to the administration, I think it tells a very clear story that the media has fallen down and not continued to play that watchdog responsibility that they have to the American people.
We'll be right back. And we are back. Joining me now is TV producer Jacquie Jordan. Great to have you back again today, Jacquie.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Is there a liberal bias in the media?
Well, that's a really great question. I think there's bias in the media, period. And I have written and produced for all sorts of mediums and media. And when you have something that's corporate owned, it's just natural that there's a bias. And I also think that it's not necessarily a liberal or conservative, because I think both exist depending on ownership. But I also think that just generally, even the intention of trying to not offend people is creating a bias in the way stories are
in the way
told.
that Brad said, where maybe if you're trying to appease the right wing or something, then it's
either way, or certain groups or certain, it's just the way, even a self-editing creates a bias. But I think the onus is actually on the audience and the consumers to be discriminatory about what they're watching and who's putting it out there, how information is being sold. And of course, people who control information have a lot of power, and usually, whether it's a conspiracy or agenda or not, they're putting information out. And I know that, news certainly tries to, has the intention of just communicating information as it's reported, but I believe the audience has to watch it with discriminatory.
As you said when we were talking earlier, you said, you feel that it's just an obvious fact that there is bias, and that the audience needs to be discerning or realize that and deal with it. But Lew, are you saying, though, you feel that it's possible to keep bias out when you're writing the stories?
Well, let me just address a couple of things that you referred to. The idea of treading lightly with people, it kind of goes against everything that we do. I mean, I think there's enough criticism of the news from all sides to realize that we step on a few toes. But I mean, it all goes back to the expression that we want to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. We decide where the stories are, and kind of wherever they take us is where we go to. And there's nobody standing over our shoulder, waving a finger saying, oh, go easy there, oh, go easy there. I think there was certainly enough criticism of Bill Clinton and Whitewater and all of that, and certainly there was enough criticism of the Bush administration, I've seen that, to see that I think the media can kind of cut both ways.
I disagree, because, even just in terms of topics and subjects, there's subjects that are so hot and still so pressing that the news just doesn't touch, because
such as
AIDS.
Okay.
It's a breast, AIDS, breast cancer. There's a lot of topics.
So you
like
won't
that.
talk about AIDS and breast cancer?
We talk about AIDS and breast cancer all the time.
Now,
Channel 7 did a
October,
week-long series on breast cancer.
In October, when it hits the breast cancer month, is when it's a timely issue. But overall, I have been turned down, even as a somebody who's been producing stories. They're like, it's done. People, and some of it, in all fairness, is for the fact that audiences aren't interested in it or aren't responding to it, or maybe that they're, aren't creative ways of telling the story. But I have been turned down for subjects that aren't popular or...
To what extent do ratings influence when you're writing the news or choosing topics? Where do ratings fit in your mental picture?
Ratings are kind of a double-edged sword that we have to live with. I mean, it's something that we all have to live with, and we know we're aware of it. But you know, you mentioned car chases in the past, and I know it's not anything to do with bias, but quite frankly, we don't cover car chases anymore in the same way that we used to.
Congratulations.
That's great. No,
You know,
seriously.
we might show that they're going on, and we say when this comes to an end, we'll come back to it anymore. So we're not and yet the other stations might cover car chases, and their ratings might go up. We don't do it because we just feel there's nothing to be gained here anymore.
And some local stations are now starting to sell their in-content time because they can't keep the local stations afloat financially without selling their in-content spots. So
Is it identified to the audience that it's a paid spot, or is it just passed off as the news?
I think that that's a good question, and I can't speak specifically to it, but I think that just the general assumption overall
Because
is
it's
that
in the newscast.
is that isn't happening or that doesn't happen. So that starts to change the boundaries of that.
I don't know exactly what you're referring to in the way of spots. I mean, we have the sports segment that is sponsored. Sometimes we have the weather segment that is sponsored, but those are all clearly identified. Nobody's trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. There's a corporate responsibility here that we want to make sure that people understand exactly who is bringing our newscast. But as far as the news coverage of individual stories, again, I have to say there's no corporate influence. There's nobody standing over or sponsors saying, oh, gee, we don't like that story. Don't cover that story.
Yeah, I've had a very different experience in my time of producing and writing that I have felt that influence.
You told me you felt that stories were pulled in some cases because of advertising considerations?
Yeah, absolutely. And even who it might offend from personalities above.
Political, like
Absolutely.
organizational considerations?
Yeah, or just corporate figureheads, or those type of things. But I would also because in making my point about it is I do think that we're living in an information renaissance, and I think that the internet has opened up like such a vast, wide point of views, and that's why I keep going back to the fact that the responsibility of information is on the consumer and not on the broadcast mechanism to put it out, because now you can search and find information and check your sources and dig deeper and just compare. So I really think that
you're not just relying on the
I
TV
just think that
news
information and mass media has to be consumers have to take responsibility for the way they perceive and read their information. And as was said in the last segment, a lot of people just take what's on TV, period, across the board, not just news at face value.
That's a double-edged sword, though, because the fact that you can go on the internet and you can search a lot of things, but that doesn't necessarily tell you the source of that information.
Right.
And unless you start scratching a little bit below the surface, that literally could be anybody putting that out there. So
well,
you
it's
don't
interesting
always know
because
that.
people always accuse the mainstream organizations of bias, but then, of course, most of the bloggers are very blatantly biased, usually. I mean, in a political sense, you have a very right-wing or left-wing blog. I'm not saying all, but many. So it's interesting that they're just blatantly biased.
I think that's the same. I mean, it still makes my point that it's on the consumer to take responsibility for how they how they hear their information.
Unfortunately, people tend to view things that they see on the internet in the same way that they say, gee, it's in print. I saw it in print. The fact that
so it's the New York Times, or it's on the internet, or it must be true it's on the internet.
Must be true.
Print is very powerful.
Lou, I have to ask you, when I got in a taxi the other day, and I hear this all the time, but maybe from taxi drivers
I'm
and
impressed
others.
that you got into a taxi.
Well, the car was in the shop, But I heard that, it's all a big conspiracy, that the government, the media, that, I don't know, not necessarily NBC or GE, but the media is running everything, that it's a big cover-up. You know what's really going down. You're not telling us. It's all a hoax. It's a cover-up. I'm sure you've heard the media conspiracy theories. What do you say to people who think that it's not just political bias, but you're pulling a scam over everybody's eyes about everything,
Well,
apparently?
I'm fascinated because, as we all know, NBC and CBS and CNN and Fox and everybody were all in a death race to try and get people to tune in. So why would we be in conspiracy with each other when we're really trying to take and fight for the same audience?
Historically, that's what yellow journalism is. When Hearst owned the papers, it was all because he was trying to control and put out certain types of information. And like I keep saying, I don't think it's evil. I just think it needs to be acknowledge.
People fess
yeah,
up.
Just
Well, it's interesting when you look at some of the history. I mean, there were examples from yellow journalism, from even Lincoln or Ben Franklin, different things. Lincoln accused the Southern papers of being biased, you know, certain. Is there a higher standard today for what's, it looks like in the past a lot of things happened. Is it less acceptable today, even if it's happening? You know, we feel that news should be objective, but it looks like in the past, hell, it was anything goes and whatever you could get away with.
I think the fact that there is so much information out there and such a multitude of sources, if anything, it forces everyone involved to be that much more careful and to be that much more accurate and to think that much more carefully before they put something out, because it's obviously going to be watched by everybody else and very quickly countered if it's not right.
Well, thank you very much, Lew. I sure appreciate it. We'll be right back. And we are back with Brad Friedman, and joining me now is Patty Malone, former TV anchor and communications professor at Cal State Fullerton. Great to have you back again today, Patty.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, Brad, you came in all riled up after that last segment. I know you had something on your mind.
Well, there was a couple of points that were made in the previous segment that I'll respond to quickly because I want to slightly respectfully disagree with both of those folks. Lew had mentioned that they covered Clinton aggressively and they covered George Bush aggressively. I would think the record would show that was anything but the case during the Bush administration, where we saw unprecedented corruption and criminal behavior by this administration, and we saw unprecedented rolling over by the media to not cover these things. And if you have any questions, take a look at what they put Bill Clinton up for impeachment trial for versus what they didn't put George Bush up for impeachment trial for. There's no comparing the two, and there was no comparing the way they covered the Bush administration. Let them get away with anything. To that end, I suspect Bill Paley and Ed Murrow are rolling in their graves right now, because the media has a constitutionally protected responsibility, as I see it, as the only industry that is named in the Constitution. And to that end, they are given the free airwaves, the largesse of the country, to say, to perform this duty. So when your other guest, Jackie, had said the onus is on the people to go out and find the information, yeah, the information, the accurate information is there, but it should be delivered to the people free on the airwaves that the corporations get to enjoy because we allow them to share those, to use those public airwaves. We shouldn't have to go looking for that information. It should be coming to us. They are our airwaves, after all.
Well, Patty, if I may say so, I believe you told me you lean in the Republican direction.
Somewhat.
But yet you are
some issues.
part of what is often called the liberal media. Based on your experience as a TV anchor, the years at the station, is there a liberal bias in the media?
I don't really see it that way. It seems to me all of us had our own personal opinions, and to me I think what's really important is just that we would not convey our personal opinions or let it sway our reporting or how we were covering the news.
But how do you do that? How do you keep your personal opinion out? And now he's saying if you look at the window and it's raining, you can't say it's dry and it's raining both, or you can't, sometimes being objective isn't really being truthful. What is balanced coverage? How do you do that?
I think it's actually a personal choice that you make. I can think of one example when I covered a story. It was on rather a religious cult, and they did not want to talk to me. In fact, they refused to talk to me. They thought I was going to cover it really going against them and in favor of more liberal viewpoints, and I didn't. I actually took a step back and I thought, even though I totally disagree with these people and what they're promoting, I'm going to be objective about this. I'm going to present both sides of the story, and they actually wrote letters to me and to the station thanking for the unbiased news coverage. So I think you can do it. I mean, there are times when you're personally involved in stories, you know people, or you're covering a story and you're connected to it, and it's hard to take a step back, but I think you learn how to do it just the same way that police officers and doctors can take a step back from dealing with the things that they're dealing with and not emotionally respond to it in that way.
Can you be objective?
Yeah, objectivity is not the same as balance.
Balance.
Objectivity is more like being fair. There's nothing wrong. I do a lot of reporting at bradblog.com on elections and concerns about our election machines and so forth. Now, when you've got scientific evidence, one state study after another, showing, for example, that Diebold voting machines don't record votes accurately, can easily be hacked, you need to report that. Yes, it's right to go to the company, to go to Diebold and get their comment on it, but when they come out and they say, oh no, our machines are perfectly accurate and secure, you don't end the story there. You know, it's not a matter of giving both of those, you know, those two sides and leaving it there. After they've said our machines are secure and accurate, you can go out and show demonstrably that they are lying. And with the scientific evidence. And that's not, you know, being subjective. That's showing the objective evidence that one side is telling the truth and the other side is lying.
Well,
and,
I would agree.
yeah.
I would agree that if it's a partial reporting and they're not giving both sides full coverage, that they should do that. I would definitely agree with that, because I've seen situations like that come up, and I think that that's being neglectful. If you're
They
not
do
giving
give
full
both
coverage.
sides full coverage. The problem is sometimes one side does not deserve full coverage, in that one side is lying and not telling the truth. And that is, you know, there was a story, a reporter, you know, who I know who worked on a story related to Diebold, found some pretty startling stuff out. It was at a network, that ABC, I'll go ahead and say it, that she did some great investigative work, but Diebold did not want to give comment for the story. So the attorneys at ABC said, well, we're not going to run that story because Diebold won't comment.
But usually you run the story and just say they refuse to comment in response to this. Or we tried to contact them and they refused
Usually
to
you
comment.
do,
That's
but
what you typically
ABC
do.
didn't.
Well,
I'm so sorry we are out of time. Thank you very much, Patty
you.
Malone and Brad Friedman from Brad Blog. I
Thank
sure
you.
appreciate it. Thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.